Cool. And there we are. Rocking and rolling with Jerry Foltz. Jerry, thanks for coming on and being in your motorhome there. It's very, very cool as we were talking before we came on.
Thanks. As you know, we have lived out in the country, and our internet service is very spotty and very bad, actually. So we have to rely a lot of times on cell service. This was Karen's idea to make our little couples camper here, as we call it, into our studio for Zoom calls, because now we can do it off the cell signal. It works great.
Yeah, I've got to look into one of those more often. I've got all my little knick-knack hobbies. I mean, my latest one is, and I've been doing it for years on and off. I just hadn't committed to it. Was the latest craze is the ice baths or the cold plunges now, and I've been doing that consistently now for a couple of weeks. And it's not fun, but when you do get out later, you do feel great. I don't know if you tried that.
No, I mean, the closest I get is reaching into an ice chest to get a beer, but no, that's miserable. But the reward's good.
It is. Yes. So recently, in fact, as recently as yesterday, there's a so-called new controversy they're trying to, I think, kick up the stuff between LIV and the PGA Tour guys again. And the Patrick Reed, Rory so-called controversy, I don't even think it is one. Have you seen that at all or read anything about it? Or, I mean, it went all over social media the last couple of days.
Yeah, I read the first thing, and I think it was the Daily Mail. I don't know if that's a reputable source. I should check with Karen if that's a tabloid or a reputable news source in the UK. But and I read it, and I'm like, I mean, Patrick Reed, Rory was busy. Patrick walked by, he didn't say hi, maybe didn't want to. I don't know if Rory's going to be, act that way about it. He's talked often about if he's friends with somebody, he's still friends with them. He doesn't fault the guys for taking the leap. But it sounded like, and then Patrick went around, just tossed a tee at him like we all do to each other, sometimes mid-swing while we're screwing around and trying to have fun. And then it got blown out of proportion by people who are looking to sensationalize it a bit. So I hope it's not a big deal. I know Patrick issued some kind of statement about it. And basically, I think he accused Rory of being childish. And well, you know which side I'm going to take if we debate it, but I think it's blown out of proportion.
Yeah, it looks like some sort of outlets in today's world, as everybody across the spectrum tries to make a story, tries to make a mountain out of a molehill. And I'm sitting there watching this and reading it. I'm like, yeah, these guys don't hate each other. They might be competitors on the course, and now I guess you'd call them competitors for leagues, but they're not going to be assholes to each other. They're with each other every day. And we used to always talk about, you try to beat the guy's brains out while you're on the course, and then you go have beer or lunch or dinner with them, the same guys that night quite often. So it's being blown out. And I just wanted to see if you felt the same way.
Well, golf is an individual sport until now. So being that way, you don't really have a kind of a loyalty. You're not allowed to hate somebody because everybody's individual. There are some players who aren't as well liked out there, but there are no real villains to the audience, much like when your home team plays an away team that you absolutely hate. When I'm a Packers fan, when the Bears come to town, no, I hate the Bears when they play the Packers. So that you don't have that in golf. I think we're bringing a little bit of that into golf with LIV Golf, but you don't really have that except for the Ryder Cup every 2 years. So a lot of people look for that kind of, sensationalized story to create interest, and LIV Golf is an easy target for them because there has been kind of this, encouraged, I'm not going to call it orchestrated, but highly encouraged effort on behalf of the powers that be that feel like they're losing power to discredit us. And so it makes easy pickings for a lot of people. But in time, the dust is going to settle. And like Greg Norman tells me every time I talk to him, because my instinct is to fight back and to tell you all the dirt I know about what goes on behind the scenes on the other side of things with the PGA Tour and all of those things. But he always says, just take the high road. Just take the high road. In time, they're going to see everything that they said we couldn't do, we have done. And they're going to see that this is a viable opportunity and a wise investment on behalf of the PIF.
Yeah, and one of the things that they said that wasn't going to get done was a TV deal, and recently that's come out. That was in the last week or so with the CW. Can you talk about that? Shed a little more light and introspect from your point of view or your side.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of, I don't really have a vindictive side to me, but a little bit here because they said we would never do it. We would never get on TV. If we did, it'd be some cable outlet that's in 20,000 homes, but we're on a network that's in 120 million homes, a legit network. Obviously, I don't know if CBS and NBC could have even been involved in the negotiation. I don't know who was involved, but I know there were multiple sources, multiple players that were involved. But this turned out to be the best deal for us. CBS, NBC have their relationships with the tour. ESPN, ABC, Disney has their relationships with the Masters. So I don't know who else was in the game, but we got the CW network and we're thrilled with it. Now, a lot of people are making fun of it because they don't know what the CW network is and they've never watched it. I'm one of them. I'm not making fun of it because I happen to learn a little bit about behind the scenes at CW. They've got new ownership, a guy named Perry Sook, who founded a company called Nexstar, who's done nothing but print money his entire career, saw a very good opportunity in CW to try and grow that into a major player, exactly like Fox did some 20, 25 years ago when they got into sports from basically a syndicated TV network of affiliates, which is what CW is now. Then when the negotiation started, he jumped right up and said, I see incredible upside in LIV Golf. I know there's some heat out there. I see incredible upside in LIV Golf. And he decided to make a huge, huge commitment to us and a huge investment in us. In the process, he named I think it's one of his board members as the CEO, the head guy at CW. And their plans are really, really big for that company. When you look at the fact that Perry's company himself, Nexstar, made, what was it, $2.4 billion in net revenue 2 years ago, that's profit. The guy doesn't throw away money. He's very wise with it. And I think it's a huge vote of confidence for the mission that we all feel like we're a part of, that he got invested in it.
Yeah, and there is precedence, as you mentioned, the Fox network, which is huge now, started is something very small, and then you had a lot of very smart people and very sharp people behind that took it to what it is now. And as we talked before, ESPN, like I said, I'm a big documentary guy. I watch a 30 for 30, and ESPN had that documentary with the Big East and the growth of ESPN with the Big East basketball. And things came together, that they had the growth of the Patrick Ewings with Georgetown and Chris Mullins with St. John's and Jim Boeheim and the whole Syracuse thing. And it just, and in the documentary that they show this meteoric just jump and rise in popularity and everything. And I mean, growing up in the 80s, I remember, everybody was a Big East fan. And so it's the people who naysay or say, negativity about it for pick a reason, one of a plethora of reasons. It's like, well, there is a lot of precedent of this happening in other sports and throughout recent history, and extremely, extremely successful.
That would require some just not believing everything you hear, and that would require a little insight and a little intuition, and maybe even a little work to know that many of the things that they criticize us for are not only hypocritical, and I don't really want to go into the litany of things that from either a political or cultural or an economic standpoint, but it would require a little effort to kind of see the whole story, and it wouldn't make it any fun. The good news is, Pete, they're starting to run out of things to be picky about, to be petty about, to criticize us about. They're actually starting to run out of things, and we'll keep checking them off the list one by one. And, and listening to the comments, which the narrative has changed quite a bit. It hasn't changed 180 degrees, but there are a lot more people out there who see through the transparency of the criticizers and their motivation for doing so.
And it does seem to be very centralized in that a lot of the criticism is coming from here within the U.S., to where I've had guests on the show who are from the U.K. or around the world. And the animosity or the negativity towards LIV, it does not seem to be as great. Now that might be anecdotal, just the people I've had on or the people I talk to. You've been around with the tour, the LIV tour, and have you seen something similar? Is it just more stateside that it's coming more negative because that's the nucleus of the PGA Tour, which is the competitor, or have you seen something different outside of the U.S. and where really LIV is focusing on the growth?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. When you travel internationally and you look at countries like Australia, the United Kingdom, and what the PGA Tour has done with the DP World Tour, I say done to them, they'll say done with them, and becoming a partner and making the DP World Tour basically the season-long race to leave. Top 10 now get to go to the PGA Tour.
Yeah, that's amazing that they accepted that.
Yeah, and they're really going to have a hard time finding tournaments and finding sponsors for any level of purse to their players in the very near future, I would think, because they lose their stars every year. When you look at Australia, the PGA Tour has ignored them for 20, 25, 30 years. I remember when Jack Nicklaus was in his competitive prime, he would go down there and play, as did many of the American stars in the Australian Open, which I think long ago probably should have been named a major. Never was, and they're completely ignored. So their country doesn't get to see world-class professional golf at this level, at the LIV level or a then PGA Tour level ever. So there's a lot more animosity toward what the PGA Tour has done to the worldwide golf scene by monopolizing it than there is anyway toward any moralistic opposition to LIV Golf.
Do you think that the PGA Tour and the size that they've gotten, and it does become, and this isn't I'm picking on them, I'm just curious, because this is my perspective, that they got so big, and when something gets so big, it becomes more difficult to manage, but you start to lose some vision of what your purpose is. So one of the purposes, for example, being grow the game. Obviously, they have to provide the best product, but if you become too big and you start moving weight around and taking the perspective of we have to protect ours first, and you start to alienate the organizations that helped you get there, the DP Tour, the Australian Tour, and now that's just seems to have irritated or disrespected, maybe that's a strong word to use, some of these organizations, and why they're more apt to talk to LIV, accept LIV, listen what they have to say, and at least check it out. Where, I mean, if this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't think it would have had the same development or the same rapid growth that it did. Could be wrong. So I guess that's a odd way to ask a question.
No, I mean, there's some good intuition there, in my opinion. The PGA Tour, they'll tell you they're growing the game, and in many respects, they are growing the game. They're doing these small parts to be able to take the PGA Tour. Well, there was one in China, not anymore. Latin America, PGA Tour, Latin America, and different regions across the globe, but they're only doing it under their umbrella where they get to control everything. Their control has grown exponentially in the last, 10 years, actually. It was on that path under Fensham, but it's grown exponentially, their influence, and that's human nature. You have power, you want more. You have money, you want more. The only problem, I don't mind the fact that they have all that power. I do mind the way they wield it. With a very authoritarian, and especially in response to LIV, a very authoritarian kind of tone. As a player, as an independent contractor, which they're technically supposed to be, as you don't have team owners except in LIV Golf. Now you do, but in the PGA Tour, you don't have owners. You don't have guaranteed money until their response to LIV. You get a guaranteed minimum. There's a very authoritarian feel to it, and I think that's why we're where we're at right now from a legal standpoint and from an animosity standpoint. It wasn't intended to be that way. Obviously, we were going to come in as a competitor. We wanted to be additive. They scheduled the events and they continue to schedule the events opposite schedules on the PGA Tour date that hurt the least. They're not going up against big tournaments that are what are now some of the elevated events, so were never intended to do that. They wanted to be able to coexist. The PGA Tour made it very obvious from the moment that first tee shot was hit at Centurion in London that they had no interest in playing that game. And so every step that we've had to take along the way has been forced by them. Maybe some of their choices have been forced by us with this purse elevation and the elevated events, and Jay Monahan doling out a lot more of the money from their coffers that primarily were the result of the exponential new TV negotiations to the players. But they made it obvious from the time that first tee ball was hit they didn't want to. We have done what we have to do to protect our own interests and our own business model. And unfortunately, it's going to probably end up in courts. For them to say, well, you need to drop the court case and you need to fire Greg Norman. First of all, Greg Norman is an adult in the room, much more so, I think, than those who accuse him of not being an adult, as we have witnessed just very recently. And secondly, The court case was, we didn't ever want to have to file a court case. I don't know anything that's going on behind the scenes from the lawyers, but I can tell you, being
Mhm.
in the, in the environment that the hopes of having a talk early and trying to forge a path to where things could coexist, I know that was there, but one side didn't pick up the phone.
Yeah, I think that's from friends of mine who were just average everyday golfers, and they don't know the insight. I got a lot of calls when this first happened, and my short-lived playing career, and I didn't get any of the success that I had hoped I had. I think I played in a couple of back then nationwide events. I missed more qualifiers Mondays by a shot than I care to remember for every tour I think I tried out for. But I was, my time was early 2000 to about 2007, and even back to 2000s. I missed that year, and I caddied for a friend who was at finals. And now I'm just a younger kid, and I'm hearing all the guys who were veterans, and I can't even remember some of the names back then. It was so far long ago. But I mean, they were complaining back then because that was the time of the year that they would, after Q school, that there was that gap until the Hawaiian Open, if they were going to be in that. But that was the time, November, December was the time of the year back then that guys could go to Australia, they could go to Thailand or Asia, they could go to in the Middle East back then to different tournaments. And they, if they were a big enough name, they could make an appearance fee. 20 years ago, but there was still money that they could make. And they were very irritated. The talk on the range the entire 10 days or 2 weeks was that they were pissing and moaning, rightfully so, in my opinion, that they were not getting their releases the way that they thought they would or should, because they had met the criteria to allow them to get the release. So I tell my friends, I said, this is not something that just popped up overnight. This was 20 years ago that I was aware of it. I'm sure it started prior to that. And Mark Lai, verified that when he was playing. I think he said he wanted to go play in the Scottish Open one year and thought he could. And the tour said, no, they vetoed it. We're not giving you a release. So this has been brewing for many, many years, decades, in fact. Or at least one part of it that nobody knows about unless you were out there.
I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to play one on TV, and I'm not going to get on a soapbox, but there is a little bit of a restraint of trade there by denying somebody guaranteed money. Mark was going to get an appearance fee to go play in the Scottish Open, and they said you couldn't, but you have to play in the event that's scheduled on the PGA Tour if you want to play that week, and you get nothing guaranteed other than the fact that you're going to pay a caddy, a hotel, and airfare to get there. And back in those days, even a rental car. So, that's Greg Norman tried starting that league with Murdoch years and years ago, 20, 25, 30 years ago, the World Tour, so to speak, 30 events or 30 players, a limited number of events, and big money. He always felt, as an international star especially, that you should have the right to play where you want. He should have the right to go play anywhere around the world that he wants, as long as he meets the so-called contract, which I don't know if there is one. You have to, if you want to play the only game in town, you have to sign your name on the dotted line and agree to their rules. You can call that a contract if you want. It might be a little more, I think some might call it extortion, but I don't know what it is. I never had that opportunity. I would have signed willingly. But I wasn't Greg Norman. Greg Norman was a world beater his entire career, and he wanted to maximize his earnings potential while he could. He's done it in the business world successfully over and over and over, and doing it again now. But he wasn't able to probably do it as well as he wanted to back then. And there are no owners in golf, but you feel like you can't make up your own mind if the PGA Tour dictates when and where you can and can't play. And when they do let you play, a lot of the events you see these guys playing in, the organizers of that event have to pay the PGA Tour the media rights to release those players, even though there's nothing else going on that Monday and Tuesday. If they want to televise, they got to pay huge money for that. So they hold all the cards right now, and fortunately, I think for the players long term, when all the dust settles from this, and LIV will eventually succeed, and it is succeeding already, in my opinion, but it'll eventually succeed. Eventually, the PIF will have realized the investment that they wanted, which is all this is a business investment for the PIF to try and guarantee prosperity in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia long after oil runs out. They'll realize their gain, and they will sell it, and there'll be a new owner, and it'll go on and on and on. And I think looking back, then the players, everybody will realize this was really a good thing for the overall, the guys who play the game And I think a byproduct of that too is bringing golf to a lot more places, opening some eyeballs, bringing a different type of product, bringing the team aspect into it, and the passion that we see worldwide into all team sports, bringing a little bit of that to golf. And for right now, we're just doing it in, I think, a very refreshing style with our telecast and presentation on the golf course for those in attendance.
Yeah, the fact that I call it a meteoric rise that you guys had, or that LIV had in its first year, to go from basically startup or almost nothing outside of, okay, we have this idea, we have a management
right.
team. Yes, nothing. Scratch, probably below scratch.
Yeah,
I mean, not only, it wasn't organic. Yeah, you couldn't go buy. It's not like you're buying organic at the store. You actually had to go round up the seeds and then plant the seeds and then harvest that. So to go from where they started from less than a year ago to the success that it had in its first year, I told the people who are even anti-LIV and very pro PGA Tour, I said that is highly impressive. If you don't want to admit it, just take a look at the business aspect of it. How many companies have ever gone? I mean, maybe Apple, that when they went from nothing to Steve Jobs was worth like $100 million in the first year that they started. That would be along those lines. I mean, someone can out there on Twitter, someone can bash me and say, no, they did this. Just trying to give some sort of perspective. But it was extremely, extremely successful in its first year. Between the players that were signed, the amount of attention, and it made golf, whether you like them or not, it made golf a front page headline the entire year, on par with
every
NBA,
single day,
Major League Baseball, NFL. Every single, yes, it was up there. It was on CNN. It was on Fox. It was on networks. Everything. It was everywhere. So that can't be bad for golf. It's got to be good. And I'm sitting there shaking my head, like, the people who say it's bad for golf, like, well, how? If it's just elevated it to a whole new level.
There are Madison Avenue types that tell you the try and put a dollar value on the amount of exposure LIV Golf got last year just through organic news. And it's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling, the value in that people would pay to get that kind of exposure, to get that kind of, it's just, name recognition. I go to a lot of places, and, I've still considered myself a very outgoing guy. I love to meet new people. And they'll say, what do you do? Well, I used to be a golf commentator and for the Golf Channel. Oh, yeah, for that. I covered the last part of my career, mostly the LPGA Tour. Yeah, I watch that every once in a while, but I watch the men's golf more. A lot of people have never watched, unfortunately. I wish I could change that too, very much so. Mm-hmm. But now I took a job for LIV Golf. Oh, LIV Golf? You work for LIV Golf? And then the questions. I mean, these are guys that run the spectrum of society. From a job, occupation standpoint, and everybody knows of LIV Golf. They just announced that there is going to be a tournament coming here to Orlando to help the players prep for the Masters the week before the Masters. That was announced 4 days ago, 4 days ago, 5 days ago. I have a couple of hundred ticket requests. I don't have that many friends. I live out in the country. I got 2 neighbors. But I like meeting people. I have at least a couple hundred ticket requests right now, and I can't tell you how golf nuts Orlando is. You can tell by the crowds at Bay Hill every year for the Arnold Palmer Invitational. Those will be down a little bit because they've lost a few of the stars, but who knows? Orlando really supports golf. But it'll be huge. It'll be quite big. I can't wait for that. But yeah, everybody knows LIV Golf. The advertising's been enormous. The value of that advertising. Go ahead.
Orlando's a very international city too, so I can see that being extremely popular event.
Yeah, yes, it is. Fastest growing city. I think it was fastest growing city in the U.S. the last 5 years. So it's enormous. And much of the investment comes from overseas.
I want to touch on or ask you one more question about the TV deal, because one of the appealing things that were really nice about watching the streaming on the LIV events was no commercials. How is they're going to CW and the investors there are going to have to implement commercials to start to offset their overhead and eventually make money on this deal. how has there been any talk about how commercials are going to happen? Is it going to be the usual every 7 minutes or so, or is it going to be more Augusta-like where it's one every 15 to 20?
There have been, I catch the periphery through some of our Zoom calls, usually relating to other matters, but usually having to do with the production. I catch a few of the tidbits here and there. I think that's one great thing about CW, and I don't want to call them mavericks, but they're kind of making a maverick move here. I think we're going to get a lot more creative with our ad space and ad purchases than you've ever seen before during a golf broadcast. Obviously, it's a necessary part of it, but it is not in any way going to take away from the amount of golf. It's not going to bring us down anywhere near to cutting the amount of golf we show like you're used to seeing at the tournaments that don't have those extra buys from the sponsors to keep the commercials to a minimum. It's going to be creative.
Yeah, because I would have, creative, because I was going to say it is the amount of things, and Greg Norman with his career and understanding some of the liberties, I guess, that the PGA Tour took amongst with the players, and Greg having a very good understanding of what the players wanted, what they liked and what they didn't like, and then implementing that into LIV. I would have to think that the team that he has surrounding him is also very high achievers and a lot of creative people that taking the easy route and saying, no, we're going to do commercials, the same way it's always been done. I just don't see that as something happening. So I'm, as somebody who's watching all the neat and interesting things that they've done, I'm very curious to see how they handle that aspect as well. I know it's probably minutiae to many people, but maybe it's just a geek in my head.
Greg, 1 year ago today, you mentioned there were 2 LIV employees too. It looked like it wasn't going to happen last year after all the controversy with the release of the quotes from the so-called book. And then within 5 months, 5 months, and then eventually 5 weeks, when they finally made the decision, we're going forward. Within 5 weeks, they had assembled a business structure. They had hired 100-something employees, many of whom didn't need the job, or some just wanted to do something a little more exciting. Extremely talented people. I mean, some of the brightest I've ever worked with, but the ones that impressed me the most because of my side of things, he hired a guy named Will Steger, the guy who negotiated the TV deal. He's the chief. I just call him chief broadcast officer, chief whatever. He's the most naturally gifted leader for whom I've ever worked, and I know if he listens to this, I'm blowing a little smoke up his hooter. But he's so incredibly bright. His resume reads like I haven't taken a bad step yet. Everything he's done has been a success. I would love to read it off to you, but it'd take too long. And he and Will and along with an Australian guy named James Watson, who much of what you see on the air is his brainchild. And it's so different. And I think it's refreshing. It's so creative, but it's so different the way in which we're televising this, the pylon, all the different graphics, and he never runs out of ideas. But they also consulted and hired as a consultant a guy named David Hill, who is basically, if there's a Mount Rushmore of televised sports, he's right there front and center. Everybody in the industry reveres David Hill for what he has done in his career. And then they went even better, in my opinion. They hired the best producer for whom I've ever worked, a guy named Keith Ursland, who also hired me originally at the Golf Channel. He was their first producer. Anybody who's worked with him and with others will tell you the same thing, if they're allowed to. He is the best. And they hired, hands down, from what I believe, and I think many people in the industry believe, and those who work for him will tell you, the best director in Steve Bime. So there are so many talented people behind the scenes. The broadcast can't fail. And I sit there alongside Arlo White and David Faraday, and we have fun and watch TV and talk golf. I feel unworthy to be in all of their company when I'm around them. They're just tremendous, tremendous people, and so much brighter than I'll ever be.
Speaking of Faraday, what is it like being around him or on a daily basis during the week or
exhausting
in the telecasts? And then it's got to be interesting, hilarious. Does your stomach hurt at the end of the day from laughing so hard, or does he get serious at any point in time, or is he just loving life and sucking the marrow out of it best he can?
He's batshit crazy. That's all there is to it, certifiably. your stomach gets sore every single day. I mean, I've heard so many of the jokes, and there's always new ones that surprise me. You never know when they're coming. He's he's so incredibly funny, so incredibly witty, but I don't think there is a serious side to him, and that's a side that people don't see very often. He does so much work behind the scenes for wounded warriors and for veterans of the American services, because he is the most patriotic American I've ever met in my life, and he's he was born in Ireland, Northern Ireland, so he has so much compassion for people. And when we leave the TV compound to drive to the booth or to drive to the range, now remember, they don't open the gates at all at the facility for people to come watch practice rounds, pro-am, anything until 3 hours before the first balls hit on Friday. So we'll drive over there. The place is already packed because that's where that's where all the fan villages, all the entertainment, all the fun stuff that you don't see normally at golf tournaments. And I'll drive him through there, and it is, I mean, I literally think Elvis is in my golf cart. It's amazing how big of a rock star he is with the golf fans. And and he just treats everyone so nice. And when they just come up and, just pour all this praise on him for being the favorite, being the best, and every single time, he basically tells them, you need to aim higher. If they come, you need to aim higher. I'm no hero. So he's as genuine as they get. And I mean, I didn't know I would end up in this position, sitting in the booth. Number one, I thought I'd be on course, and sitting in the booth alongside David Feherty, that's just icing on the cake. After I was the first one that they hired from an on-air standpoint. And once I took that first leap, and those guys came aboard, him and Arlo and Dom and Sue Ann and Troy, it's just icing on the cake for me.
As I look at him, and I look at being a big sports fan, I don't want to say characters, but announcers like that who were somewhat given a fair amount of creative freedom, that were very, whether they were, some of them were polarizing, some of them were different, but Faraday falls into that. Johnny Miller I would put in that category. In other sports, Dick Vitale. I'd even put Brandel in there. Brandel seems to be very polarizing, and I think good for golf. I agree with Brandel on some things. I disagree with him on others. But I would put Brandel in that category where they're not cut from the media cloth, so to speak.
Right.
Do you see that the industry leaning towards that as things in the world just in general get more politically correct, and they want things to have a certain image, and kind of that fading out, because you don't see as many people getting opportunities who come that have no experience in that side of the business, and then they become exceptionally good at what they do?
Yeah, you know what? David didn't need any experience. You put a mic in front of him and let his personality take over, and you won't turn off the TV. You won't change the channel. That's all it is. And I think there are some like that. I think through the growth of the influence of the PGA Tour as an entity, and basically everybody towing the line with them, you see less and less of it now than you did back then, when it didn't have quite the power to control the narrative like it does now. It seems to, anyway. I can speak firsthand to it. It absolutely does. I've had it happen to me before in my previous job. So they're losing a little bit of that, but David needed no experience. Johnny Miller was very much the same way. Johnny said the greatest line, and I live by it to this day. My boss isn't the PGA Tour. My boss isn't the producers. My boss isn't the guy who signs my check. My boss is the viewer. That's the one I have to remain loyal to when I'm talking about something. And it's easy to lose sight of that because you don't want to make a player mad. You don't want to hear bad comments about yourself now through social media or when you're walking the range. It's easy to really you certainly don't want to get the email or the phone call from Ponte Vedra that they were ticked off at something he said. Mm-hmm. So you tend to walk on eggshells a little more than the previous generation did. I know David has said one of his favorite things about his new job, other than a really nice contract, is the fact that he gets to be him. And he didn't feel like later in his career with CBS and then with NBC that he actually got to be him, and he loves to be him. And he has no rules when we go on the air. Zero rules. David, you talk when you want. You say what you want. You don't talk. Arlo and Jerry will take care of it. And It's the best. It's absolutely the best. And I can, I'm sitting next to him and I can kind of read his body language. I know when something's good's coming. And I just sit back and shut the hell up and let him go. Cause, I love to talk and I get paid to talk, but I love to listen to him more as a viewer. I'm 100 times more interested in what he might say than what I do say.
Do you think that he and Barkley would have been a good team, or are they too similar in that they might have overlapped one another?
I don't know. I mean, Barkley's the same way, no training whatsoever, and arguably the most popular studio analyst in sports. I would say Brandel is the best studio analyst in sports. Obviously, I don't like a lot of the stuff he says about us, but in time, Brandel does his research and he presents it in a very convincing manner, extremely convincing manner. I'd call him more galvanizing than polarizing, because galvanizing means not everybody agrees. Polarizing is David Faraday. Everybody loves Faraday. Not everybody loves Brandel, but he's great at what he does. No question about it. And he doesn't take it personally. Like, we shouldn't be taking the criticism against LIV. Much of it, I think, is highly unfounded, but he doesn't take it personally when you disagree. So I think Barkley and David, if they put those two together, I think the rest of us just, go out on the course, grab a beer and watch and tell us when it's time to clean up.
And just interject when they need a break, or they got to take a water break or something. Just, hey, you guys take the reins for about 10 minutes and these guys will be right back. That was very intriguing. That would have been a lot of fun to at least see, even if it was would have been an experiment for a short time. I don't know what the negotiations were, but that was going to be very interesting to watch. But it didn't happen. But both very cool guys. Very
I think if that would have happened, many people with the NBA and with Turner would have came and kidnapped him out of our camp and just said, no, you can't have him because he's just too popular. He's too good for ratings.
What with the success that LIV had last year, I say meteoric rise in the first year.
It was meteoric. There's no question it was meteoric.
Yes. And we discussed before how and earlier in this episode that the team that's looking at what to do next, they're all very highly successful. They're creative people. That they don't just say, okay, we achieved this, now let's just coast. So I don't think there's going to be any sophomore slump. But what, in your opinion and from your perspective, would define a successful 2023 for LIV?
Well, the low-hanging fruit there for me would be world golf ranking points, but those are basically obsolete, completely obsolete. And it's only a matter of time that the majors decide they're going to create their own ranking system or adopt a new ranking system, because they're supposed to be Switzerland here, and they want the best field they can have. If the PGA Tour doesn't want these players to ever play there again, that's fine. They've lost a lot of great players. They've lost some of their greatest personalities by a long shot, and they'll pay a price from their ratings and from their sponsors as well. If that's the long term result of this, everybody's going to live happily ever after. They won't be quite as successful as they were on tour without the guys, and with the popularity that I see growing for LIV Golf really quickly. It'll be a different world. So I kind of forgot the question. I started ranting there. What was the question? From a creative standpoint, there's no sophomore slump.
What would you deem successful?
Successful world golf ranking would have been one, but that's not the case anymore. I told Greg from the very get-go we should have adopted the Golf Week Sagarin rankings ourselves and published those. There's other ones out there now. Data Golf has one. I read an interesting article from a guy, I don't know which publication he writes for, but he says, let's just create a handicap system for professional golfers. It'd be very fair no matter where they play. You create a handicap system. That'd be the fairest ranking of them all. I like the Sagarin model the best, but nonetheless, that would be easy. Successful, I don't know what would define success, because everything's in place for a number of years to come. I think a successful year would be that the people just kind of, enjoy it for what it is, realize it's not going away. You don't have to like it. If you're morally opposed to it for some reason, even though it is selective, it doesn't run throughout all the different moral obligations or oppositions you have in your life. That's fine. That's fine. You don't have to watch, but don't make people Don't try and accuse people of being bad people for participating and watching, because they're not. We're surrounded by a ton of great people. You go to any of the 8 events last year, and it is an absolute hoot. Everybody has a great time. Didn't hear a single complaint for the entire year, and that's only going to get bigger and better this year.
That's what I found very interesting in the response to LIV, which I did not agree with. And as a golf fan, I'm neither pro or anti either. I'm just a golf fan. I'd like to see them both do well. And some people think it's a zero-sum game, that there's only so much of the pie, and if LIV comes in and takes some of it, well, that's going to hurt. It's like not in a world perspective. But I thought that the response from the tour and some of the names or people who've been responding and they come up in the interview room and they say their thing, it's like all the stones, so to speak, were being thrown at LIV. And I give LIV all the credit in the world and the players now there might've been a few here and there that I didn't see, but it wasn't prevalent where LIV was kind of throwing stones back. And I'm like, well, let me see. And it irritated me because it's like, hey, PGA Tour and anyone within that organization, player, management, brass, I'm like, you're supposed to just make something better. Don't knock. Maybe that's just who I am, but don't knock something else. Do better, and then let the chips fall where they may, and let the public make the decision. So it's like you're this giant sports organization. You've been around a long time. Step up your game and do something better, and say, hey, look, we understand LIV's out there. Here's what we stand for. Here's what we believe in. God bless them. Let them do their thing, but here's what we're going to do, and here's why we think you should come watch us instead of them. If they would have taken that stance, I think they would have had the people in the middle maybe lean that way or be less prone to even go look at LIV, but they didn't. And I think they pushed a lot of people who were just basic golfers and enjoy golf and watching it, say, hey, we're going to go check out LIV. I think the PGA Tour did themselves a disservice with the way that they approached their response to LIV for the most of last year, and it looks like to start out this year as well. And again, I'm not pro or anti either. I'm a golf fan. I like watching both, but I was not very happy. Not that they give it two shits. I'm a small podcast guy, what I think, but in talking to a fair amount of people, again, anecdotal, I think that the general consensus was the tour's response has been terrible for the level that they're supposed to be at, and what their image is shown to people, that they didn't hold up to that, and they can do a better job. That's my rant. Now you don't have to answer on that. There's really no question.
Well, Greg Norman told me at a dinner in Bangkok when we were talking about it, and I told him I want to fight. I want to get on Twitter. I want to get on social media. I want to present our side. I want to fight. Doing a little bit of that here, but not a ton. Not as much as I want to. Not as much as my instincts are. And he said, Jerry, he said, take the high road. He goes, right now there's not a lot of traffic on it. And he's absolutely right. But Greg, forgive me for 1 minute because I'm going to take the low road. And I'm just going to say your observation, in my opinion, is 100% correct.
And again, I'm not trying to say that to knock the PGA Tour. If this will never happen, but if Monahan or anybody from Ponte Vedra called me and say, you guys need to step up your game because you're to use a golf, you're subpar of what you're supposed to be doing. You're revered for being the upper echelon of the game. Act like it. Stop acting like a petulant teenager. So whether someone agrees with that's fine. I'm sure it's a lot won't, but that's my 2 cents on the subject. And I get irritated because I just rather see golf act better than it has been.
You'd have to be pretty blind not to be able to sense and see that the narrative is changing more in that direction than I'm sure they ever wanted it.
Mm-hmm. So for anyone out there listening, can you take them through what a LIV event is like? Because outside the things that we know, so it's a shotgun start, and some on social media have seen that the party afterwards and some of the cool things to do. But can you just, for someone who's considering it, maybe they're going to go to Orlando or they're going to go to I think you guys are in Miami and Bedminster again, so they're going to try to get to one of the events this year. Can you take them through what to kind of expect and a lot of the cool things that are happening?
Well, in a nutshell, because I know the fact that we weren't on TV last year, a lot of people heard of it, maybe tried watching it, but really couldn't find it. It's the Phoenix Open meets the Ryder Cup meets a Philadelphia Eagles football game, meaning there is the party atmosphere. You can't get away from it. I think that's the most endearing thing about it to the golf fan who spends a lot more hours at the course than probably they wanted to when they went there to see all their players on Thursday and Friday, and doesn't get to see that many. With ours, you get to see them all in a very short amount of time. There's a little bit of that team element coming in. It's never going to have the passion that the Ryder Cup used to have. I think a lot of that passion is now gone because the European team is going to be missing many of the people that were instrumental in making it as passionate as it was the last decade or two, actually, in Lee Westwood and Ian Poulter's case. And if they stick to the way they're behaving now from a European side, they're not going to be part of the captaincy in years to come. I think that'll eventually change. It has to, because their resumes are just too solid, and the pettiness of not liking the fact that these players took a little bit of a maverick role and joined another league that in time will prove to be very coexistent with the rest, much like happened in cricket years and years ago when a very similar league to what we have started up. All the world governing bodies were against it, and in time they realized they couldn't fight it, and they just lived with it, and now everybody coexists peacefully, and the sport is more popular than it ever was because of the creation of that league and the one-day games. This is going to grow popularity in golf, no question about it. We're attracting people who would never have watched golf before because it's cool. We are getting people to come to tournaments who would have never gone to a standard professional golf tournament and spent all day out there if they're not interested in it. So there's a little bit of the Phoenix Open in that most people who go there aren't interested in golf. They go there for the scene. There's a little bit of the scene. There's a little bit of the team aspect. There's a lot of great golf for the pure hardcore golf fan. You sit in one place 5 hours and you see every great player on LIV, which was, in my opinion, a lot of the greats that currently play the game. Or not even in my opinion, that's a fact. And then if you want to hang out afterwards, and the Phoenix Open has the bird's nest. We have our bird's nest on site every single day. And it's not an affordable celebrity for a performer. They're usually quite good. Name entertainers who are taking the stage and play and providing the music. It's just a great time. The coolest part for me, younger generation than me, maybe even you, but a lot of people. I think it would actually kind of span the spectrum. At a lot of our events where the parking is on site, they're tailgating for hours and hours beforehand. They're playing cornhole and drinking and grilling in the parking lots before they get let in the gates 3 hours before the first shotgun start. It's there's a little bit of that amusement park / kids tons of great kids entertainment. It's family atmosphere. And then there's the music, and then there's, some of them I saw jugglers, I saw guys on stilts, all these things to entertain everybody, especially the kids, before things get started. And then that horn goes off, and the energy is incredibly high at that point, and people have a great time. They have a great time, and then everything ends at roughly the same time, and everybody goes their way. It's fantastic. It's great for the players too. They get to hang out more together because they're not going, I'm in the early wave, you're in the late wave. We don't get to go to dinner, even if we're staying together. They get to hang out together amongst their teams, but also as the 48 guys in general, because they're all usually at the same hotel. They usually have like almost a team room at that hotel for the whole group of them and their families. A lot of times it has ping pong and what have you, or pool table or something in there as well. So there's a lot more camaraderie there amongst these guys too, not to mention the fact that they all kind of feel like a little bit like Mavericks themselves.
Yeah, and I could imagine. I don't know if I was listening to a show or if it was on George Gankis's Instagram or something. I don't know where I heard it, but the rumor was one of the reasons that Matt Wolff went from the PGA Tour and he made the leap to LIV was he did not like the being not how should I say, it's not being an individual, but being somewhat siphoned off and maybe lonely might be a strong word to say, but he liked the team aspect of LIV, and he had come out I believe after the U.S. Open shortly a couple of years ago when he came in second to Bryson, and he said he was taking time off just wasn't mentally in a good place, and doing some. I would have to imagine doing some introspection that he. One of the things was just not having friends, family, because he seems like a very personable kid. I don't know him. I don't even know anybody that does, but he seems like he would flourish when he's got some friends around him and he's able to enjoy it more, and as opposed to just being a business and a grind. And I'm going to go do my 2-3 weeks on the road and I'm going to go home and see my friends then. I don't see it. I see more guys joining LIV that enjoy that camaraderie than I do guys who are out there just like, hey, don't bother me. I got to get my 2 hours of practice in post round.
Yeah. I think it was Bedminster, the event where he played on Phil's team, and he was in contention coming down the stretch. And because on the final day we go 2 groups off the number 1 tee, so there is a little gap, and you increase the odds of the the winner coming in on 18. But he was in contention. He was finishing on 2 or 3, I believe. Phil Mickelson, who had already finished, even though you start at the same time, not everybody finishes at the same time. He went out to root him on. Matt Wolff hasn't ever played in a PGA Tour event where another player came out there, especially a legendary player, to root him on. Sometimes your friends gather around 18 to congratulate you when you win and pour champagne or beer on you or what have you. But there's a lot of solitude to professional golf. And when you're playing poorly, and he's gone through peaks and valleys in his playing career, there is nobody wants to go to dinner with a guy playing bad who's not in a great mood. Nobody wants to, go hang out or, you're coming to my town where I live and you want to stay at my house. I'm not going to invite the guy who's playing like crap. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see you distance yourself from it. Guy who's in a batting slump, he doesn't have a lot of friends on that team. They don't want to catch it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
yep.
Yeah, I think he's enjoying it a lot. I was skeptical about it at first. Very skeptical. I just didn't think. I've never heard of anything like it. I was a traditionalist in that standpoint. That golf's just an individual sport, and that's the way it is. That's the way it always will be, except for the Ryder Cup. But at the very first night when we all gathered for the draft, we had a draft for the first event, the draft party in London. I talked to, 80% of the players that were there, and that's almost to a man. That's what they mentioned that they were most excited about. Now, the European guys, and Sergio included, obviously, as European, but they saw the value in the team a long time before the Americans did, because they're used to their football clubs in the UK. Yeah. And that's, a really passionate thing. And a couple of them established team organizations before the first event, which is unheard of. They had people running things already. So they saw the value first, but to a man, coming down the stretch in Miami at Doral, that was just so damn cool. How hard they were fighting for each other. You just don't see that. And that happens to an extent every single week of the 14 weeks with LIV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be a very strong solidifier for the tour as a whole. That and the team aspect, very much like other sports have done. I think that's very intriguing. And I'm no business genius at all, but to me, that looks like that has a tremendous potential to be a huge moneymaker if some big conglomerates come in and start buying these teams or the sponsorship of a team. I think that, and in that respect, I think that's genius.
Yeah, I had
but
people a lot smarter than me. I had, when I was considering doing it, I had people a lot smarter than me who I talked to about it, who I trusted, one of them being my son. And I didn't understand the business model. And not only did he and others understand it, I heard the word many times, it's genius. It's a genius business model. And the equity that's going to come out of that team ownership is going to be enormous in time. Mm-hmm. And therein lies the genius of the business model. This was nothing more than an investment from a very sophisticated fund and diverse fund to make money. That's all it is to make money. Nobody set out to decimate a sport, as many people are calling it, or to ruin another organization. That was never the goal on anybody's behalf. It's simply to make money. And in time, the dust will settle. Everybody will coexist. This is going to be very popular amongst the fans. It's going to make a lot of money. The teams are going to be extremely valuable. Everybody will wear their team logos. Obviously, I'm a front runner, so I got my 4 Aces hat on, and everything will settle in. And then who knows what's next? But it's just a business investment. It's all it ever was.
Mm-hmm. What is the most misunderstood thing about LIV?
Well, I just hinted at it. The most misunderstood thing is that we have unlimited resources. It doesn't matter if we turn a profit. Absolutely, it does. There's a business model in place, and we need to meet it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very
I don't think they're going to keep funding it if it doesn't start to work.
Yeah, there's next to zero reservations amongst those involved that we will meet it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think at some point, as it continues to grow and maybe some of the tensions dissipates, that at some point that there would be a very similar event like a Ryder Cup between the PGA Tour and LIV?
Boy, that would be fun, wouldn't it? Would be fun.
That's why I ask. As I think about that, I mean that's the only. I mean, the Ryder Cup is arguably the biggest event. Or at least one of them. It's up there with take your pick of any other sport. And I agree with you. As you said earlier, it's lost some of its luster given that some of the stalwarts and popular ones are not going to be in it. But I think that just with this early history, let's say maybe some animosity from one side towards the other, and as it builds, let's say it's 3 years from now, if that is announced. I can't even imagine how big that would be on a world stage.
I said if it was proposed right now, I don't know for sure, but I would say we're in. LIV is in. Under the current environment politically here in America, that'll never happen unless the PGA Tour has something to gain from it, and they don't feel like they do right now. In time, when the dust settles, as you preface that by saying, I think it would be fantastic. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. But by then, there won't be the animosity because there's going to be a lot of players from the PGA Tour likely trying to play their way onto LIV at that point, because there's going to be very few spots open, and players will get relegated, and they'll have to qualify to get a chance to be on one of those teams. And those positions will be worth a lot of money. Maybe not in a signing fee, so to speak, but in an equity position on that team, it'll be worth a heck of a lot of money. So. And I think eventually in time, they'll all be able to play amongst each other as well. So I don't know if it'll be quite as animous then as it would be right now. But if they wanted to do it this summer, this fall, I think our guys would say, tell me where and when, and I'm showing up. Don't need a thing.
Mm-hmm. It's something that at least to watch and hope that I think that would be, as far as everybody saying that they're all interested in one of their highest priorities is growing the game. I think that would grow the game arguably as good as anything that anybody could possibly come up with.
No question about it, but that would take foresight instead of an eye on profit only and power. And I'm right now. I'm nominating Phil Mickelson for the LIV captain already.
Yeah, I think he'd probably have that one. Could you imagine if he was a LIV captain and Tiger was the tour captain? That
wouldn't get any ratings.
If they just listen to us, everything would. No, not at all. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you've been gracious enough to give me an hour. We do have the emergency 9, the questions here at the end.
Yeah.
That if you got a few minutes, we can. Okay.
Absolutely.
So the first one and last one, as everybody knows who listens regularly. If you don't, the first question and last question, everybody gets. It's the same. So if you were speaking of Ryder Cup, if you played on the Ryder Cup, what would have been your walk-up song to the first tee?
Pat Green, Texas country musician, Feels Just Like It Should. And you've heard the song before, you might not remember it, but it was the anthem that our Hank Williams Jr. intro at the Golf Channel when they first got the PGA Tour contract and rolled out their coverage at Kapalua 13, 14 years ago or more.
Mm-hmm. All right. Very cool. Let's see. Your favorite purchase in the last 3 years of $1,000 or less?
Recently, I got a little handheld chainsaw. We live in the sticks out here. We got 5 acres and a little handheld chainsaw, almost like from an infomercial. It's $70, and that thing cuts through 5 and 6 inch trunks like it's nothing. I told Karen, I'm like, I need to cut down more stuff. We got palm trees. I won't cut those down, but I got another chainsaw that's going to cut those down. I think that might be one of my favorite little gizmos in a long, long time. Yeah.
All right, cool. Very cool. You could buy stock in any golfer over the next 5 years. Who's it going to be?
Joaquin Neiman. Obviously, I'm going to stick with a LIV guy. And I don't know anybody who has more upside than him, Joaquin Neiman. And it would obviously be a LIV guy because I think that's where the majority of the money eventually will be for players who want to really get rich.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see. Best golf movie of the three: Caddyshack, Tin Cup, or Happy Gilmore?
Our friend Mark Lai is not going to like the answer, but I like Tin Cup the best. Absolutely. Only because who hasn't wanted to do what he did on the final hole? I did a version of it myself, actually twice in my career. Once in Pensacola when I was leading through 8 holes of the first round. I had a 1-iron into this par 5, number 9. It was their 18th hole, but I played it as my 9th. Little lake jutted out in front of it. I just crushed this 1-iron. I came up like a foot short. My caddy started walking forward. He didn't hear very well, so I asked for another ball. He didn't hear me, so I screamed his name. I go, give me another ball. He goes, no. I go, give me another ball. Hit another 1-iron right in the water, another foot short. Went up there and finally listened to him and proceeded to make my 9. And missed from leading the tournament through 8 holes, I think it was 5 or 6 under, to missing the cut badly.
Yeah, that would do it. Not many have a tin. Well, I guess some might have a Tin Cup story, but that's a real Tin Cup story. I mean, it is as close as you can get.
Everybody's wanted to at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a guy here. Let's see. Ronnie would have been your age. Ronnie Frisch.
Yeah.
Lived on the island, and he was like the golf legend of Hilton Head when I moved here. I got here in '92, but Ronnie would sit there on Palmetto Dunes on the par 3 that borders the highway, and he'd hit 5-wood. The hole's only 190 yards. He'd hit 5-wood out over the highway and slice it back to the green just because he didn't want to hit a 4-iron straight at the flag. But I think Ronnie would probably be another one that would have done something like that. I remember one day, not to get off subject, I know you got to go. He shot 68 one day at one of the local courses, and he went into the golf shop the next day and emery papered the paint off of his driver shaft because he said it irritated him on one of his tee shots that he didn't hit the fairway. But I love Ronnie to death, so if Ronnie, if you're hearing this, don't take it the wrong way. Anyway, moving on. Your dream foursome, if you could dream for anybody that you wanted to play with, who would it be?
My son. World leaders are an easy target. Entertainers, gosh, I don't know. Karen, have to be Karen, my son, Karen Stuffles, and my son, and I don't know. Let's go neutral. Let's go. Yeah, it would be actually a very good one. Gandhi. So maybe then
that's interesting.
I would learn how to behave on the golf course because I never did.
Well, that's a pretty interesting, a great segue for me that you teed that one up for me without even knowing it. Your go-to word when you miss a shot on the golf course?
Gelding.
All right. A couple more.
Okay.
If you could put an emoji on your golf club, what would it be?
My golf club? Oh, it would be the middle finger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd probably be right there with you. I think I'd have to. I can't say some of the things. My brother's got a couple buddies who are tour reps, and some of the things they sent him, I can't. I mean, I could repeat it, but I wanted to keep it somewhat PG-13 rated. But yeah, so I've seen a cool thing. That's where that question came from. Just from some of the interesting things I've seen come from that world. Any swing in the world, if you could have it, whose would you take?
I mean, Ernie Els, Fred Couples. You got to look at some of the longer guys now who make it look easy. Jamie Sadlowski, that would be one that would be right at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. The former World Long Drive Championship with his effortless looking move. But I got to stick with one I've used before when asked that question. But George Knudsen, Canadian who died at 51, who was revered as in the same breath as Ben Hogan as a ball striker.
Yeah, he was very good. As we said before, Marty Chuck he said George was very influential on his career, both in being from around the Toronto area. And I think Martin grew up where George kind of helped out with the junior golf kids, and he kept in contact with him his whole career, and he speaks very, very highly of him. And then the last one, in your opinion, who's the GOAT golfer? Greatest of all time?
Tiger. Jack has more majors, and had he known he was setting a record that probably wouldn't be matched, and that would be the barometer by which players are measured for eternity, which it seems like it is, he probably would have won more. When he finished playing, he had a legitimate count of 20 majors because they counted the U.S. amateur a major, and then somehow they quit counting that a major. I think once Tiger won 3, the sports writers, out of respect to Jack, wanted to make him a little harder to catch for Tiger than that. But because they're ultimately the ones who decide. I, for years, thought the Players was a major. They were never going to name it one. I thought that it's obviously not now because they're not going to invite the defending champ and probably a couple dozen other players who should be there. But yeah, they get to decide that. But yeah, that's that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I really, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. It was great to finally connect. I hope that some people out there who tuned in to listen or subscribe or whatever they call it in the podcast world this will shed a lot of light on the realities of LIV Golf and what it is and stands for and what it's trying to do, as opposed to just hearing some, fourth, fifth hand post on some social media, or it's a friend of a friend of a friend told them. And hopefully it does it so positively. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on.
Oh, thanks, Pete. It's my pleasure. It's nice that people hopefully will be able to at least hear a little bit of the other side. And, so maybe the vitriol and the hypocrisy will die in time. It doesn't bother me anymore because I know how undereducated or uninformed it is. But it's not a lot of bad people involved with LIV. Not a lot of bad people. Players, all the organization in general, everybody that works for us, they're great. I've been fortunate to be a part of very similar organizations. I was part of the Golf Channel when it first started, and some incredibly talented, incredibly committed, dedicated, smart people involved. And then, of course, it grew and grew and grew, and the mothership took over, and you lose a little bit of that personal touch and family feel. I think we're going to have that family feel for a long, long time with LIV.
Very cool. It's going to be very fun to watch over the next this year, of course, and then every year after. And again, I think it's done some good things for golf, and it's going to be interesting to see more that comes out of it. So very excited for you guys.
I'm 100% convinced that time will prove that exactly to be true. Absolutely.
All right, cool. Thank you, Jerry. We'll sign off and just hang out for a minute, and we'll get it done.